when we're experiencing things like fear, the tendency might be to recoil away from it or to avoid that fear. And what I encourage my clients to do is actually to turn towards that fear and ask it questions, be curious about it. What is it trying to protect you from? How is it trying to help? And I think from that place, you can start to learn some of the core components that might be driving your decision making.
Welcome to the Mind Your Leadership podcast. I'm Karen Suk, and today I'm excited to have Nicholas Whitaker with us. Nicholas is a middle life transition coach, co-founder of the Changing Work Collective, and host of the Needs Improvement podcast. As a double certified life coach and with 20 plus years in big tech and media, he specializes in guiding midlife tech professionals to break free of their golden handcuff to find purpose and fulfillment beyond titles and paychecks. Through all of his various endeavors, Nicholas aims to be a champion for professionals navigating and shifting trends of today's workplaces, ensuring they will equipped with the tools and insight to thrive. So today we will discuss what really needs improvement in our corporate world and what are the tools we need to embrace in order to thrive in today's workplace. So Nicholas, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's so good to see you.
You too. Being part of your community and seeing you live now, it's great. And I love to start with a personal question, and I would like to ask you, what was your highest or lowest point of your life or career path, and what have you learned from this?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Well, I think there's a few things that come to mind for me. Probably one of the highest achievements that I've ever had has been going into business for myself several times. Before I worked in big tech and before I worked in media, I had my own production company for about a decade. And that was both a product of necessity, where I was unable to find work at the time in a regular job right out of college. And I had these skills doing video production and telling people stories. And I was able to put together over the course of about a year or so enough clientele and enough work to actually create a business. And then that became a career for me for almost a decade. And then I went into big tech for a while, and I worked in a couple other organizations for a while. And just even, a couple of years ago, back in January of 2023, when I was laid off after 13 years in big tech, which was also probably one of my lowest moments, the very first thing that I thought of to do when I got laid off was not to go back into corporation and not go back into big tech, but to go back into business for myself. So it's been a little over a year now. As you just read my bio, I'm working with clients as a coach. And then I've also created a startup called the Changing Work Collective, which I'm incredibly proud of. And we've been having a really good time building that over the last year or so.
Sounds great. So you can tell us about the Changing Work platform that you built, this kind of community, right?
That's right. Yeah. So the whole idea behind it is, well, first of all, when Scott Shute, my co-founder, and Amy Serene, my other co-founder, when we first kind of got together and started talking about what we wanted to do and what we were working on, it was very obvious that we were kind of aligned, mission aligned. And a lot of the things that we were trying to solve, a lot of the challenges that we were encountering in our own businesses were the same challenges that other people were also encountering. And we both had this very deep passion for wanting to change work from the inside out, literally helping people have more psychologically safe teams, have more positive outcomes from the workplace. And this is right on the heels of me being laid off and about a year or two prior, Scott retiring from his job at LinkedIn. So we were very present of mind in terms of like what we had witnessed and experienced within the workplace, and just knowing that people were struggling and suffering because of unconscious teams and unconscious leadership that was making it really difficult for people to thrive at work. So we built this community, started off just on Slack with like 30 or 40 people, and then we switched to another platform, and it's ballooned since then to about 650 members. And right now it's mainly focused on consultants, coaches, facilitators, subject matter experts. The people would be going into organizations to help do leadership training or team development training. But we're right on the verge of actually opening up 2 new areas within the community. One for leaders, which is ultimately the people we want to reach. They have the outsized impact to make change within the workplace. So we want to equip them with the right skills and knowledge and resources to be able to do that. And then we're going to be creating another area within the collective, within the community for employees. So people that are suffering from unhealthy or toxic teams or are in a career transition of some kind. And what we'd love to be able to do is create this ecosystem where consultants and leaders and employees are all who are all interested in things like conscious business, have a place to go, have a way to connect with one another, and we can really move things forward for everybody collectively.
That's amazing, because first of all, I really believe that today, in order to have a big impact, we need to go together, right? So you're actually connecting everybody and to share ideas, to be in the community, because, as a solo entrepreneur, it's really tough to be out there alone. So you're creating this platform for people to not feel alone and to get an advice or advise other people. So I think that's really amazing. And, I want to circle back to what you said before you transitioned, because you came from the corporate world and you know what the most struggling there. So I'd be happy to hear from you. What areas do you believe needs to be most improved in the corporate world in order to really thrive and for people to feel safe and happy?
Yeah, well, so much. But, I think, at the very top, there's been so much over the last, say, 100 years or so that I think has changed in terms of the way we go to work, the way we actually show up at work, and the way we as individuals are valued in the workplace. And I think what my experience was, and I can only really speak for myself and for the clients that I've worked with and the people that I've talked to, there's a real disconnect, for most people. They go into work, they want to be part of something important, they want to provide value, they want to have impact of some sort. And then they get into these environments where bureaucracy or leadership chains are kind of set up in such a way not to really help people thrive, but just to try to get as much productivity out of them as possible. And, I think that, coupled with poor leadership training, with lack of support for people who have neurodiversity, for example, lack of inclusion in the workplace, all of these I think are symptoms of a dehumanization of workers in the workplace. And at the very top level, I think what that really speaks to is a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion and a lack of humanity within work. So many of these organizations are really just focused on making sure shareholders have the revenue that they need because of the investments that they've given. And we like to think that there's actually another way of going about doing that. It's not a new idea. It's an idea that's been around for a very long time, but you might hear it in terms of the triple bottom line, for example: people, the planet, and then profits. Mm-hmm. And if we can try to influence more leaders and we can try to influence more business owners to think a little bit differently about how they're approaching working and how they're approaching taking care of their employees, I think what we would find is productivity would increase. The data tends to show this. We would see more profitability. We'd see better sustainability long term. And, all boats could rise instead of just shareholders.
So I couldn't agree more. You're preaching to the core, because my PhD was more than 10 years ago, and this is actually what I wrote. And for me, and for us, it's kind of a common sense. Okay, it's common sense, right? If you see the complete person, if he feels seen, if you increase his well-being, he will be much more productive and engaged, right? So, mm-hmm. And I'm also working with clients and organizations, but it's kind of a paradox, because it's the essence of success, but still I'm really amazed to hear that there's a lot of bullying stories in the corporate. So for me, I need to say I'm shocked from it, because it doesn't resonate with the consciousness we had in Tawhid, but there's a big gap, I understand, still, that we need to close. So I want to ask you, what do you think the crucial element that if we will help leaders to embrace will have the most impact on the corporate and the culture?
No, that's a great question. Well, I think it's a couple of things, but first and foremost, I think it's helping leaders build greater self-awareness. We just actually published or started to publish a book. It's going to be launching here in September, called The Self-Aware Leader. And it's specifically targeted at helping leaders gain better awareness of their inner experience, how they relate to other people, and really the impact that they're having. So I think that's part of it, building self-awareness. I think also the next step of this is building awareness of others and having that kind of more compassionate, empathetic approach, that humanity or the human approach to leadership, where it's not just a command and control model. It's not just trying to extract the most value out of somebody, but as you said, really looking at somebody as a whole person and figuring out, well, what is it the individual person needs to be most successful. I hear this all the time, where, there's been mass layoffs. I think Intuit actually just laid off like 1,500 people or something just a couple of days ago. And they marked a lot of the people that got laid off as poor performers, as why they were laid off, which is a travesty for these people that got laid off because, it puts basically a mark on them that's inappropriate. If you have a layoff, if you have a reduction in workforce, that's one thing. But then to go to the extra step and then basically put the responsibility on the employee for underperforming, well, that's indicative of a bigger problem. And what that usually says to me is that there was either a poor fit in the first place, that the manager or the hiring manager hired somebody that they should not have hired, or the leaders and managers aren't really supporting the employees in a way that would allow them to be successful and to perform at a high level. Mm-hmm. So, I think when you build self-awareness as a leader and when you build awareness of others as a leader, it stops becoming this kind of like zero-sum game approach to shame and blame and like, well, who's responsible for like us not performing. We look at it holistically. We look at teams and organizations holistically, and we can figure out like, okay, is there efficiencies that need to be made here? Is there, different ways that we need to approach the way that we're leading so that everyone can be successful? You mentioned something about bullying in the workplace. And, I think that this has become a really interesting topic for me. I spent 13 years in big tech, and I had many, many, many good years there. Probably about 8 or 9 of those years were excellent. I do know, though, that, I had encountered in 2 different occasions managers and leaders that were bullies and that were abusive and that harmed me mentally and emotionally. It made it really difficult for me to be able to perform well at my job, even though that's exactly what I wanted to be able to do. Mm-hmm. The last role that I had before I got laid off, it was an incredibly toxic team. There was bullying. There was people getting managed out. The churn in that team was very, very high. People were taking mental health leaves left and right. And, one could, in that scenario, maybe think like, well, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not working hard enough. Maybe I'm not performing well enough. And I think that's a very common thing that I hear from a lot of my clients is they're blaming themselves. What could I do differently? How could I do better? But I really like to try to encourage people to think about the environment that they're in. And is the environment that they're in conducive to being able to be effective at your job and to be productive? And I think the same thing goes for leaders and for managers. If you have self-awareness and you have self-compassion and you can look at that broader view and take a look at the system that you're in, I think it becomes a little bit more obvious what things actually need to change. And it's usually not on the individual employee. It's usually the systemic issues that are causing environments that makes it difficult for people to perform well.
I agree with you so much because, I had a conversation today with one of the managers, and I really believe that, first of all, it starts with self-awareness, understanding what we feel. And when you talked about the bullying experience, the automatic, I think, response of ourselves is to blame ourselves, to take responsibility and to feel like we are not okay. And I think this is a great and important message that we need to put out there, that if you feel uncomfortable in a situation, first of all, pause and listen to yourself and respect what you are feeling. Don't push it in, because usually that's what we do, right? Because we don't want to confront our manager, our colleague, our spouse, whatever, right? So I think this is the most crucial element, first of all, to respect ourselves and to respect our unpleasant feelings that we're feeling right now and not close it. Because in the automatic behavior, I can say about myself, when I felt also a kind of a bullying, actually from my spiritual teacher, not bullying, but a really aggressive behavior, I was ashamed. I saw that it took me I was shocked. I got into a freeze situation, and it took me like almost a week to dare to speak about it because I felt not okay. I really was ashamed the way behavior acted toward me. So I think this is really important to put this message out and say, dare to feel the unpleasant feelings and don't automatically blame yourself for these unpleasant feelings, and create the space, right? And explore. And the second, and I think also a crucial element, is the communication space, right? Because people don't like to confront. So I will be better not confronting and observing everything and being taking all the other stuff of other people and not handling, because it's better for me not to confront. So I think the communication piece is so crucial. What do you think about it?
No, I think that's totally right. And I think there's a couple pieces to that too. I think fear is a big component. The job market is really difficult right now. And I think a lot of people are afraid and nervous, at least in the tech space, specifically. I think it's something like 500,000 people have been laid off since 2022 within big tech, and it's continuing to happen on an ongoing basis. So you're in an unhealthy environment. You're working with a leader that's, maybe a bully or maybe a toxic leader of some sort. And you're afraid to lose your job. You're afraid to lose your livelihood because you might not be able to find a job right away outside. So you keep your mouth shut, you keep quiet. Or, if you're struggling, there's this stigma around struggle. I literally just posted about this yesterday on LinkedIn, this idea that it's a sign of weakness to say that, you're struggling in some way, or you're finding it difficult to get through. And if you don't have a psychological safety with your leaders, or your spiritual leaders for that matter, it makes it really, really difficult to be able to thrive within those environments because of that hierarchy, because of that power differential. And I think that's one thing that leaders really need to keep in mind is, it gets lonely at the top, and maybe, it's a little bit different as a leader to find the resources that you need. But, thinking in the other direction in terms of the people that are actually reporting to you, there's a power differential there, and there's a relationship there that needs to be respected. And there's a dynamic there that needs to be understood that might be preventing your reports and your employees from being able to speak up and feel comfortable sharing the areas that they're struggling in. I think about this myself with one of my last managers that I had at the company before I got laid off. I remember she asked me early on when I first started to report to her, like, are there any specific areas that you're looking for development in, or areas that like you feel like you can improve in? And I was like, yeah, I think there's like these 2 or 3 things that I could continue to work in. I'd like to see my career trajectory move in that direction. And sure enough, the very next performance review that I had, those very things that I mentioned that I wanted to get development support on were the things that were listed as demerits on my performance.
Wow.
So it immediately broke trust. Like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to trust that leader if I share something vulnerable and I share an area that I need support in, and then that's used against me later on in a performance review. Like, there's no way that trust is going to be able to be built there. And I hear stories about like this all of the time. Where employees are trying to get the help that they need, they're trying to get the support that they need, and their leaders are just not responsive in the ways that they need them to be.
I know that you transitioned to be in a coach in midlife professional, right? And helping people to transform and navigate their career. So
That's right.
What would be your advice to these people, that are staying out of fear in the workplace, that are afraid to lose their paycheck at the end of the month? So what will you advise them?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that I recommend to people is to network like crazy. Like, be reaching out to as many people as you can. Your network is your net worth, and I do believe that. Every job I've ever gotten, I've gotten through a referral from somebody that I knew. So even if you don't think that you're going to be needing to get a new job, or you feel like you're really secure and safe in your career, I think networking and having conversations with other people is really important for 2 reasons. I think one, it gives you the opportunity for potential job opportunities later down the road. And I think the second thing is it helps destigmatize the experience of struggle. Like, the more I talk with people, the more I hear from other people, the more I hear that our stories are actually really similar. And a lot of us are dealing with the same challenges. And, kind of back to what you were talking about earlier, like the tendency to immediately blame ourselves. As soon as you start talking to other people and hearing that, oh my gosh, they're going through the exact same thing, it takes the pressure down a little bit, and it makes people realize, I think, like, actually, maybe it's not just me. Maybe it's actually the environment that I'm in. I think another thing is always be looking, looking for new jobs, looking for new opportunities. I think one of the things, and I fell into this myself, is I got really, really comfortable at my job, and I stopped looking for new opportunities. I stopped updating my resume. I stopped learning new skills. And I think for most people that I talk to that are in that situation, maybe they're 20 or 15 years into their career, and suddenly they're experiencing a job loss or a layoff. That's a very hard place to be in, to suddenly have to start from scratch in an emergency situation and potentially find new skills and new networking opportunities to find that new role. So I think preparedness is a big component of this. And I've heard a few different people talk about it in terms of really owning your career. Like, go in there, own what you're doing, have intention behind the choices that you're making, and don't get so hung up on, like, what is it going to look like if I hop out of this job? If it's a toxic job, if it's an unhealthy manager, that has a real material impact on someone's mental and physical and emotional well-being. And I can tell from my own experience that I waited too long to leave. I should have left a year before I actually did. Because of the impact on my mental and physical and emotional health, it took me a whole year afterwards to basically recover from that.
Hmm.
And there's a monetary value to that you can place. We end up spending so much money on self-care to try to assuage the issues and correct the damage that's done from these types of environments. If that money could be better spent on career training, or could be spent on getting a coach to help you find out your next career, like, that would put you in a much better place later down the road.
Wow, it's so important what you're saying, because I really believe that a lot of people that work in the corporate world, as entrepreneurs, we need to be always networking, right? Navigating our career and thinking ahead. And I also have a conversation with a lot of people that are working in the corporate, and they like sleepwalking. Okay, I have a job, I have this. And then things started to move, and then they started to be scary, and they feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a good advice for people to be tuned every day. Even if you're working in the corporate, ask yourself, where are you heading? How do you want to navigate? Talk about your success, create connections in the workplace, go to events, and continue, see your own path career, even in the corporate world. Don't forget yourself, because I think really people get asleep. And as you said, at the end of the day, they need to wake up, and it takes more time. And another thing that you said that I want to refer, you said at the beginning also, you talked about the attachment, because we are attached, we are fearful that we won't have a paycheck at the end of the month, that we won't find our new job. And then we get attached to the situation, and we bury ourselves. And actually, as you said, at the end of the day, what we fear, what we resist exists, right? Something the saying goes. So if you resist the workplace and you stay there out of fear, at the end of the day, what you fear will occur to you. So you will live in an unpleasant way, apparently, but you will live at the end. So when we give our energy to fear, the fear will navigate our life. So I think it's another invitation when we feel, and from my experience, when I'm in transition, when I'm in a growth state, I always feel both emotions, right? Fear and excitement. So it goes together, right? And I learned that in this specific moment, when I feel paradoxical emotions, I'm in a good place, because this is the movement. And I need to see how I handle my fear, and how to give the energy to the excitement and to go forward. And this is what I want to invite people to listen to themselves. And if they feel the fear, also look for other emotion within themselves. Maybe they are curious about another company, another opportunity. Don't close it up and be stuck with the fear, right? Because the fear will take you to the place you don't want to be. What do you think about it?
No, I think that's spot on. There's a couple pieces to that too. I think for me, fear is a signal to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. It's a signal that you care. And it's a signal that you're basically on the edge of your comfort zone. And I think it's pretty well known that, like, when you're at the edge of your comfort zone, that's actually where the most learning and growth actually happens. We can't just stay within the same container forever and assume that we're going to be able to grow just by being in that container. So when we're experiencing things like fear, the tendency might be to recoil away from it, or to avoid that fear. And what I encourage my clients to do is actually to turn towards that fear and ask it questions, be curious about it. What is it trying to protect you from? How is it trying to help? And I think from that place, you can start to learn some of the core components that might be driving your decision making. This is something that I work with my clients early on most times, is like getting really clear about, like, well, what your values are. What are your boundaries and non-negotiables? What are your core beliefs that are driving you? Like, what's really important to you? And a lot of times, like, what comes up for people is when they have that fear come up, what they're usually afraid of is like scarcity. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of potentially failure. And I think if we can kind of change the perception of those things as not being negative, but being kind of stepping stones along the pathway towards personal growth, it can change our relationship to the experience of fear. And we can still take bold choices. We can still move forward towards our goals and towards our purpose, and use that fear, as you said, as a fuel to propel us and to move us forward. It's not something to try to ignore or try to bury or avoid. It's actually a really powerful tool that can be used, and a powerful signal that something here is important to us that we should be paying attention to.
That's so true. And, I think part of being in this transformative times in the workplace and in the world all in general is the ability to be in the answers and not to know the answers, not to know how a thing will conclude. Maybe I have a conflict with my boss right now and I decide to speak with him and confront with him, and maybe it will go well and we'll find a new position for me, and maybe I will leave the company at the end of the day. But the fact that I won't confront him, as you said, I will close myself in this comfort zone, and at the end of the day, I won't stay there, right? And I won't be happy. I won't fulfill myself. So it's also not a good option. So the invitation is to dare to work with our feelings and to dare to be in the process. And I think the most important thing is to let go of the consequences, because we don't know where things will go. And in the business, in the corporate world, I think this is a main challenge that we need to work with, because we need to deliver, we need to know the numbers, and it's kind of tough to know. We don't really, even, salesperson who puts numbers, we know that they put numbers, but they don't know if they will get there, right? So it's kind of a game. So, and I want to ask you, because I know that you coach your clients also based on the Stoic philosophy, right? And the Buddhism. Yeah. And I'll be happy to hear from you. How do you use this philosophy in your coaching? And
yeah, sure. So there's three main kind of pillars to the coaching work that I do, or concepts that I use within my coaching. Largely, it's based off of Stoic philosophy. It's also based pretty deeply off of Buddhist psychology. And then positive psychology and the research around performance are other components that I bring into it as well. But for me, it's so much about being intentional, being aware, and being methodical about your approach and your process. With Stoic philosophy and with Buddhist psychology, the big components that come out of that is this idea of allowing and equanimity and controlling what you can control and essentially letting go of the rest. If you haven't been steeped in Stoic philosophy, it's not a big deal, but basically the whole concept behind this is like being attentive to what your experience is, understanding what your inner weather system is, understanding what your needs are, what the things are that you can actually control, what you can't control, and having a process in place that allows you to ground and to center with yourself, so that, for example, if you're encountering a toxic leader or a toxic manager and you're noticing yourself being activated and your nervous system lighting up, well, there's probably self-care practices that you can do there in the moment to take care of yourself, to center and to ground. But then there's also like components of the Stoic philosophy of like, well, how much of this situation do I actually have control over? Again, when we first start to encounter these things, we tend to blame ourselves. And we're like, oh, I need to fix myself somehow. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, that's not the thing that needs to be fixed. What needs to be fixed is to be removed from that environment, put in an environment that's healthier, and that's more set up for you to be able to succeed. You need to be able to be coming from a place of discernment in order to be able to understand that and to be able to make those types of choices. And that's where the Stoic philosophy and the Buddhist psychology practices come into play. There's one other component to it as well, where, I think with positive psychology and Buddhist philosophy and Stoicism, all of these things combined create this really beautiful set of tools to help you weather any storm. So if you are dealing with high stress situations or uncertainty, these principles and these old wisdom techniques that go back thousands of years are time-tested methods to allow you to meet those moments with grace and with purpose and with intention, instead of just being on autopilot or just being reactive from a place of scarcity or fear. So I think that a lot of people respond very well to those. And, I think that, people have a general sense of what Buddhist psychology is like. And maybe they've read a couple books or seen a couple quotes about Stoicism. And oftentimes it's misconstrued that Stoicism is about like burying your feelings and not being emotional. It's completely the opposite, actually. It's just about being very aware of your emotions, being aware of what's happening within your system, much like with Buddhism. And then being able to step forward from a place of discernment and from empowerment instead.
Sounds great. And do you practice with your clients and in the corporate world? I saw that in Google you brought the mindfulness piece, right, to Google. Right. Can you elaborate on it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there's two programs that I was a part of with Google. There was Search Inside Yourself, which was a really beautiful program, all about building emotional intelligence and building mindfulness practices. I also helped volunteer for the GPAUSE community, which was our meditation and mindfulness community. And I had been a part of that community for many, many years. But over the pandemic, when everything went remote and everything went virtual, what we were able to do was expand that program exponentially. We had something like 5,000 or 6,000 people worldwide who were part of this program. We had a teacher training program that we had set up. We had chapters in different regions. We had a newsletter. We had guest speakers that we were bringing in. And what we did was we created this really beautiful community for people to center around, so that if they were struggling in the workplace, or if they were just struggling with the pandemic in general, they had a community that they could then be a part of to kind of destigmatize their own experience and actually learn the practical mindfulness techniques and skills that could help them navigate that period in time. And it's something I still do to this day. I just don't do it at Google. I still teach mindfulness meditation. I host regular meditation sessions. And then with my clients, we typically incorporate some form of mindfulness practice in almost every coaching session, whether that's just a basic arrival practice or a more formal meditation practice.
Amazing. So actually you continue to do the community stuff and the mindfulness with the new changing work.
That's right.
Startup, right? That you created, actually took it out of Google and say, okay, let's make it accessible to everybody and to see how we help them to embed it in the workplace, in their practice as consultant. And I really believe it's really, and it's such an important technique, tool, state of mind, the practice, because as you say, the grounding, because in this uncertain times, I don't know how are you, but I sometimes also have an anxiety attack and say, okay, I'm practicing for 20 years. I'm having an anxiety attack, but I can see it coming. And then I take a few deep breaths and it goes. And to be honest, in these challenging times, I'm practicing much more meditation every day because I need this anchor and grounding. So I think it's really a practical tool. I call it tool. I know that in the Buddhism, they don't like it as a tool, but at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? To anchor ourselves, to find our center, not to be moved by the wind of change, and really come calmer and more fresh to the next meeting, to the next challenge that we need to handle. So I want to invite people to find their own practice. And, practice can be even walking meditation in nature, right? Getting 5 minutes out of the office and having this cleaning our mind and smelling the area, listening to the birds, be present.
That's right.
What are the techniques that you can offer people to embed in the day-to-day? Something that it's really like.
Well, I think you named a couple there that are really brilliant. Being in nature, getting sunlight, I think is like a very easy one that people tend to overlook. Various different mindfulness practices that we were just talking about, like an arrival practice or a grounding practice or breath work. These are all pretty obvious things that people tend to talk about and go towards. Journaling, I think, is also a very powerful tool. For one reason in particular is it provides a very powerful data set for you. If you go back week over week or day over day, you can look at trends and you can kind of get an idea of like, oh, well, when I have meetings with this person, like I feel anxious, or when I have these types of things happen in my day, like my productivity dips. And that gives you data to be able to then make decisions off of. And this is something that I work with my clients quite a bit with, is like building that awareness. First of all, figuring out a system for them to be able to document what their experience is. And then we do a time and energy and attention audit. So a lot of people, they might just do a time audit and look at their calendar and look at those different blocks of time where they might not be being most effective, or they might be prioritizing things that aren't really aligned with what they need. And I think that's a really beautiful practice and tool. But what I like to add on top of that is also track your attention and track your energy. Because there's a lot of times where we block off time to do a particular work task and our mind wanders, or we end up on social media scrolling in a feed instead of actually focusing on the things that we want. Same thing with our energy. Like, we might wake up and like have this big project that we need to start first thing in the morning, but we haven't really taken the time to take care of ourselves and ground ourselves and do that self-care that we know that we need to. So then we start to do that work and it's a struggle and we can't actually move forward in what we're trying to do. Well, if you do an energy audit and take a look at where does your energy go throughout the day? Where does your energy go throughout the week? What you'll probably find are cycles. And then what you can do with that information is you can start to align specific types of work with specific periods of time during the day. For example, I don't typically work with a client first thing in the morning at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. Why? I need to use that time to check in with myself and figure out what I need to do for the week and be really intentional about the rest of the week. If I just jump into a client call, well, now I'm kind of absorbed in what that client is dealing with. So little tiny tweaks like that. Like, I'm not going to wait until 4 o'clock in the afternoon and do a big project that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of creative work because the energy just isn't there. So, I think these little micro practices of just tracking over time can be very, very powerful. I think another one that people tend to overlook quite a bit is just talking to other people. I think that's actually a very, very powerful tool. Simply just sharing with somebody and saying, you know what, look, I'm struggling today. I'm having a hard time. Just being able to express that and vocalize that sometimes can allow the tension to just kind of dissipate a little bit. But also, I think it just makes it real for you. It makes it real instead of something that you're kind of burying or ignoring. It's allowing it to be at the forefront. And I think giving it the name and giving it some space and allowing it to be what it is a very powerful technique to then move forward from that place and be able to say, like, yeah, I'm struggling today, or yeah, I'm afraid today. And I also have these other things I'm going to do. And it can be a yes and.
Amazing. Because once you give attention to your feelings, they can, as you said, emotion is energy in motion, right? So they can transform and move. Otherwise, we're maybe stuck in our body. And I really like the mapping energy. I love it because this is circling back to part of being aware of ourselves, right? Yeah. Understanding when I'm good, when I'm focused, when I'm overloaded, and creating my day accordingly. So this is an amazing practice. I didn't think about it. And taking this forward, like I had a conversation with a colleague today, and she told me, when I'm walking, I have great ideas, like my wandering mind goes and I have an explosion of ideas. So people wanted to meet me for coffee. And I told them, no, I'm not meeting for coffee. Come for a walk on the beach. And then I'm giving them a consulting and ideas for 1 hour that I don't know where it comes from. So this is the creative path. So I think this is part of understanding our energy and mapping it and working with it. We can be much more effective and creative and innovative, right? So this is amazing. Right. Connects back to the self-awareness piece, right?
Yeah. And I would add one thing to that too, so there's this whole idea of flow. When we're creative, when we're in a state where we're able to be productive and we're able to be creative, that's flow that we're talking about. And it's not just something that you can flip on a switch and be like, oh, now I'm in flow. There's conditions that need to be present to allow that to occur. So if we're not cultivating that environment, if we're not being thoughtful about our schedule, if we're not being thoughtful about how we're organizing our time and our energy and attention, it's going to be really hard to get into that flow state. And, people tend to reach for motivation. They tend to reach for these other tools, which are okay in the short term. And maybe it can get you over the hump a little bit, but it's not a long-term strategy. Getting into a state of flow and orchestrating your days and orchestrating your weeks in a way that allows for that is going to be a much more effective strategy. So again, bringing that self-awareness in, being aware of what you need to be in a state of flow. What are the conditions that need to be present for you to feel comfortable and psychologically safe and whole? These are all critical pieces of awareness for somebody in order to be able to really thrive in the workplace and beyond.
Amazing. Nicholas, I can continue for hours speaking with you, but we need to wrap up. So I wanted to ask you, is there any question that I didn't ask you, something that you want to say to our listeners before we wrap up?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in the world. I think the big thing that I'd like to leave behind for people is, first of all, you're not alone. So many people move through their workplace and move through their life thinking that the struggles that they're experiencing and the hardships that they're experiencing is unique to them. I've talked to literally hundreds of people over the last couple of years. It's the same stories over and over and over again. And I think if we could just allow ourselves to be a little bit more vulnerable, to share our experience a little bit more and connect with other people, what we'll find is that we have an amazing support community available to us, and we don't have to walk this path by ourselves. So that would be one thing that I would love to leave with people. The other thing that I would like to leave with people is that it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be hard all of the time. So many people I talk to, they're like, well, this is just how business is. This is just how corporations are. And I just fundamentally disagree with that philosophy. I think that if we have courage and we have the willingness to stand up and say, this isn't right, this is not how I want to manage, this is not how I want to lead people, and we approach people from a humanistic standpoint and from a place of compassion, I think the workplace and I think organizations in general are going to be a lot better off. And if this is something that people are interested in, literally changing work from the inside out, I encourage people to check out our community at changingwork.org. We have a beautiful online platform. We have monthly gatherings that people can join. And we have opportunities for people to collaborate on projects to also help advocate for change within their own organization. So there's a lot of cool things that are coming out. So if people are interested, check out our website, changingwork.org. And if anybody's struggling with navigating change in their own life, I'm always available to offer a strategy call for folks to figure out like what their options are and what their next steps might be.
Amazing, Nicholas. And I think it's a great thing that you created this Changing Work collective, because we really needed to help each other to navigate our business world and the corporate to the place we want to thrive. So thank you very much for your great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. You're invited to subscribe to our podcast in order to know when we upload a new episode, and follow us on social media. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and bye-bye.